Told the kids, my favorite holiday is Halloween. Now, what's interesting about that, being a pastor, is that sometimes we get into arguments about Halloween. Some of us don't like it because it's based on pagan things and it's scary and dark, and we call it the witches' holiday or whatever. And so what's important to me is what makes it my favorite, or what makes it valuable, is not what we're doing, but why we're doing it, right? So for me, Halloween is a blast because it's fun. We get to dress up, and for me, that was always superheroes. For my kids, it's very similar. It was rarely ghosts and goblins and scary stuff. It was usually Batman. Way too many years it was Batman. But the reason that we celebrate it wasn't because of witches and ghosts and devils. We celebrated it because we got candy. That was the reason. We got to go door to door. We got to go up to random strangers' houses, ring their doorbells, say these ridiculous words, and they gave us free candy. And then my brother and sister and I, when we were done, we'd go home. Because, of course, this was the 80s. We used full pillowcases as our bags of candy. We'd go home, we'd dump it out in piles, and we'd spend hours trading the candy but among us to make sure that I got the stuff I wanted and they got what they wanted. And we would spend all this time trading, and then that candy would last a solid week before it was gone. I love Halloween because as I think of it as an adult and as I experience it now as a parent, as I told the kids, it is one of the most generous holidays we have. I mean, we think of Christmas when we think of generosity because we buy gifts for them. But at Christmas, we're usually only doing stuff for people we like already. For our loved ones, for our family, for our friends. We buy gifts, yes, definitely. And sometimes we give to others, certainly through things like Operation Christmas Child or through buying gifts for other families. But Halloween is this cool thing where any kid that comes to my door in a costume and says trick or treat is getting something for free. And we had a blast this last week as we sat out by the fire, and as especially teenagers would come running up when they heard us say we had hot cocoa, and they'd run up, and I thought they weren't teenagers with eggs ready to pelt the garage door. They were teenagers coming excited and grateful for the generosity that we had to give them candy and hot chocolate. I love Halloween. And as it clicked over after Halloween to November, immediately I started to see in my social media pages, I start seeing friends of mine that begin something that's been going on the last few years via social media, which is choosing to be thankful for something every day in the month of November, leading up to Thanksgiving. So I have friends that on day one will say, today, the first day of Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for, and share what it is. The next day, something I'm thankful for, to try and foster an attitude of thankfulness as we lead up to Thanksgiving in the month of November. And as I told the kids, of course, Thanksgiving is a generous holiday as well. That when pilgrims came to the U.S., you probably know the story, about half of them survived the first winter. And afterwards, they met a man named Squanto, a native who he and others taught them a few things. And because of that, were able to celebrate with what they did, a 3-day feast that we now celebrate with Thanksgiving. So what I want to do is for the next 3 weeks, as we lead up to Thanksgiving, we want to look for reasons to be thankful and reasons to be generous. And what we're going to do today, as our video kind of hinted at, we're going to start with worship, with trying to understand a generous understanding of worship. Starts with what we do here in this place. Starts with trying to please God with our voices and with our prayers and with our hearts. Psalm 98 says this, "Sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm have worked salvation for him. The Lord has made his salvation known and revealed his righteousness to the nations. He has remembered his love and his faithfulness to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Burst into jubilant song with music. Make music to the Lord with the harp and the sound of singing, with trumpets and the blast of the ram's horn. Shout for joy before the Lord the King. Let the sea resound and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let them sing before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples with equity. When we come together, it's kind of like Halloween. What matters is not so much what we do, but why we do it, right? So we come together every week, and we get to sit in this room, and we come together for a major purpose. And the purpose is to offer what we have to the one who has given us so much. To offer our worship, ourselves, to Jesus. And man, sometimes I am not so good at doing that. Now, it helps when I get an extra hour of sleep. But sometimes we come in and we're dealing with other stuff. I'm coming with the baggage of my week. I'm coming with the tiredness of my staying up too late the night before. I'm coming with not feeling right. I'm coming with something I might have against somebody else. I'm coming with all sorts of things that are getting in the way of me stopping and giving of myself to God. I see two things that often happen in my life. I come either as a lazy student or as a movie critic. Now let me explain. When I come as a lazy student, what that means is I come tired, distracted, bored, and not genuine in my worship. You ever been there? Do you remember being a student and sometimes showing up? I struggled. In college, I'm not a morning person. Most of you know that. In college, I took most of my classes that started at 10:45. It was wonderful until I had one 7:45 class. And I'd get up every morning, I'd throw on a hoodie, and I'd go to class, and I had nothing to give. I didn't learn a lot. I didn't participate much. I struggled to be a part. I have friends who are professors. And one of them told me one of the hardest things about being a college professor is you spend all this time in your life, this dream of studying and educating and teaching people this idea. You learn all about your field. You become an expert in your field to the point of getting a doctorate in your field so that you know everything that you can know, and you're continuing to research, to write, to do all these things because this is something you're passionate about. And then you go and you pour out that passion on students and you tell them all about this great thing that you have studied for all these years, and you share with them how personal it is, and you share with them how important it is. And after you've done all that, one of them raises their hand and says, "Is this going to be on the midterm?" And he said, "You die a little inside every single time." Sometimes I come to worship like one of those students. I'm just not here. I mean, I'm here, but I'm not here. The other one I sometimes do, I come as a movie critic. I come to watch the movie, but not really to enjoy it, to see what I like and don't like, to pay attention to what I can share with others about later. And sometimes we come into worship in the same way. We come looking for stuff we like and don't like instead of offering ourselves to Him. Let me tell you, as a pastor, as a preacher, this is my battle every time I go to somebody else's worship service and I hear somebody preach. Because it's so easy to sit there and go, "I'd have said it this way." I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have used that illustration. That's weird. If you're a musician, it's so easy to sit down and go, "Oh, that was a weird note. That didn't play exactly the way I thought it should. That's not the way it should go." Nobody would say that about you, Vanessa, of course. Let me be clear, that was hypothetical. But sometimes we come as a movie critic. We come looking for the good and the bad, the things we like and we don't like. And you know what? We miss why we're here, which is not to make those judgments, but to offer what I have to the one who deserves it. Jesus experienced the same issue. In Mark chapter 7, this is what happens. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And he said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" And in verse 14 it says, "Then he called the crowd again and said to them, 'Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile.'" Now, don't get me wrong. Wash your hands before you eat. It's a good idea. But at the time, what was happening was this was a ceremonial washing. And the Pharisees got so caught up in the disciples not ceremonially washing their hands before they eat that they missed the point of all of it. And what Jesus said was, you guys are the ones that are missing it, not the disciples. The problem isn't whether or not you wash your hands. It's that you think you know what's going on, and yet your hearts are miles from God. They were worried more about doing the right things than doing what would please God instead. We worship because God is so generous to us. We see that around us. We saw it around us in Halloween, little snippets of what it looks like to be generous to others. We see it in all the things that we get a chance to look at in the month of November and say, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for my family, for my home, for my community, for my job, for the things that God has given me. In the month of November, you have a chance to think about what is it God has given me. And when we realize what he has provided, it is pretty easy to recognize that I owe him my worship, that he deserves my worship, to sing and to pray and to lift up my heart to the one that made me. Jay read for us before Romans 12:1 and 2. I'm going to read it again. "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." It's cool. We have this chance every week. We have this chance to come together and to have our minds, our spirits, our hearts renewed by the one who made us. And it's not just because you're listening to me talk or because you're singing certain songs or because we're reading certain passages. The Spirit of God, the presence of the creator of the universe, has promised to be here in this place with us, among us, within us, working to renew our minds, to change our hearts, to move us into the people he's made us to be. So therefore, let us give generously to God. Let us give generously of ourselves, of our hearts, of our minds, of our thoughts, of our time, of all, because he gives generously to us. Let's pray.